Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, folks. Great to be with y'all running alive tonight. It's been a while. So I'm going to wait for a few minutes here to see if anybody wants to pop on. We got a lot of stuff I want to talk about. Let me go ahead and get all my goodies out. I got a ton of stuff. So I hope everyone is doing well today and that we're all embodying our Christ consciousness. Our 13th archetype went today to a blueberry farm and picked some fresh blueberries with my friend Serena. So we had a great day. So we're just going to wait for a few more seconds. So bear with me. I'm going to run in the living room and get my house coat because I have a feeling I'm going to sit here freeze to death underneath this cold light of this cold vent. I'll be right back while we wait for everybody to hop in, okay? All right. I'll be right back. Let me grab my book too. Good. I need a sweater, buddy. I'm going to get a sweater. All right. Now I'm good. Okay. Here we go. I got a sweater. Okay. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. So we have a hypothesis that's been going around on the internet that we've already been in the Christ millennial, and yes, we have. We've been in many cycles over and over again, and they leave their mark on the clock. They leave their mark on the clock because we run on cycles. So every time that we have a cycle, a particular archetype will take the center stage, and that will be what the archetype is for that particular cycle. Okay, so right now the time cycle that we're in is the time cycle of the wolf archetype, which is the original Earth Mother. That is her archetype, is the wolf. Everything that a wolf embodies is her archetype. This is her. And all of the animals and things like that, they come from the Earth Mother. They come from the Earth Mother. So the first thing that I want to talk about is this, because for some reason this is being hid. And I screenshotted this because I had a conversation with my friend Serena, and I was telling her how there was a meteor under Bach Tower Gardens, and she went home and she told her fiance about it, and they looked it up because she was trying to show him and she couldn't find it. And then I went and looked and couldn't find it, but I had screenshotted it when I first found it because I had a feeling that I was going to have a hard time finding it again. So I'm going to hold this close to the camera so you can see this. It says the Lake Wells area of Florida was hit by a meteor shower around 1.5 billion years ago. This event, which created a series of impact structures, is a significant event in Earth's history. Okay, so you see this is an actual event. It's an impact crater event. Okay, so this is why the Florida Ridge sits above sea level. And let me get the picture. I printed up the map. I got so many things going in here. I don't know where I put it, but let me pull it up on my phone real quick because I have it. All right. So give me just a second. And I got this off of Facebook, but this is an illustration of the way it actually looked back in that time. Here it is, right here. Okay, so let me see. Hopefully I can get this where it'll show. It's not going to show. Oh, okay. It shows if I do it this way. All right. Well, this is a map. And this area that's right here through the middle where I have circled, that's Indian Lake Estates. That's where I live, right there. This right here is the only part of Florida that was above sea level. This is Central Florida's ridge. And that is because of this crater impact event that happened all this time ago. This was a meteor that Bach Tower Garden sits on top of right now. And the interesting thing about that is if you look at it on a map, it's on very important latitude and longitudinal lines. It's 28 by 82 is Central Florida. And this is where Bach Tower sits. Okay, so, excuse me. Been working out in the dirt all day today. So, if Bach Tower Garden sits where the solar plexus of the planet is, okay, this is the solar plexus of the planet. And I started going back and looking at these place names because there's so many of these places that indicate that there was Christ had embodiment in this area. I don't know how else to say it, that the saints were here. This was a land of the saints. It was Florida, guys. It was Florida. And there were places where these saints were living all over the world. And I'm going to hypothesize that this is what our star forts were for, okay? This is where the saints were. This was like their headquarters. Now, just hear me out here. Just hear me out. What if what we call star forts and citadels were actually where the saints were? And the reason I say that is because all of these places were named after saints. Okay, let me get my paper out. We got Forts of the Saints. We got Fort Christmas. Fort Marion. Marion means Mary. Okay, Marion County. I've talked about Marion County. There's Marion counties all over the place. There's Marion County in Florida. There's like 34 Marions all over. Okay, Castillo de San Marcos. That is St. Mark. Fort San Luis. That's St. Louis. Fort San Nicholas. Jolly old St. Nicholas, guys. I told you Christmas is at the North Pole. St. Nicholas, Glen St. Mary, Little Santa Fe Lake, Mandarin, which was called Old St. Anthony, Mariana, Marietta, Mecca, Miramar. There was a city in Florida called Adam, and there was another called Eve. There is an Urantia, okay? Uranus is supposed to be the father, the counterpart to Earth. The consort is Uranus. Well, there's an Aurantia, Florida, which happens to be owned by the government, but it's also Aurantia is a species of orange, like the golden apple, like the Garden of Hesperides. By the way, I live right off of Hesperides Road, which is Highway 60. See, there's place names that are left behind from these old cycles. Okay, there's the Holy Faith Lake, and there's a city in Florida called the Garden of Eden, guys. It's all in this place name book. There's a city called Belula, and this was the other interesting thing that I found when I looked up Belula. Look what this means. Belula is a Hebrew term meaning married, derived from Baal, B-A-A-L, to marry or own. Okay, so the question is how did the deity Baal get inverted, right? So if we're living in a reality that we're manifesting ourselves and they give us predictive programming, right? So they can put it into the field so we can manifest it with our minds, guys. So have we been manifesting all these boogeymen and things because there's non-physical beings that are in low dimensional spaces, right? We already know this. This is what's they call reptilians. I'm guessing this is what the archetype turns into when you fall in so far from source that you start to embody that physicality. Everything has to pixelate in the three-dimensional field, guys. It pixelates what the archetype is, what the embodiment is, okay? If you have ancient beings that are eons older than us, they have high technology, but they're very separate from their divine origins, then maybe that's how they pixelate into three-dimensional space, is naturally like a reptilian form. I mean, it's just something to think about, but not all of what you would call dragons or these types of things are negative. There's good and bad in everything. It just depends on what side that you choose to embrace. Do you choose to embrace Christ consciousness, which is the 13th archetype, or do you embrace the polarity of it, which is, we've got this Luciferianism, which Lucifer, I'm learning more and more about really what truly is Lucifer, because Lucifer is not bad. But if you embody too much Lucifer, then you're out of balance because your balloon's going up and it's never coming down. It's just, living in excess is what Lucifer is. This is, it just never stops. It just goes on and on and on and on and on and on. But then you have the opposite, which is Araphim or Arafram. I don't know how exactly you can pronounce that, but that would be like the embodiment of the animalistic nature. This would be, I guess, what we would be calling the satanic stuff with the, the really sick animalistic type predatory behavior. So, you've got these two sides, but the key point is that we need to be in the middle, right? We can't embody either one of these dualistic type things. We have to be in the middle, going even keel, and we have to be embodying a Christ consciousness. This is why Christ is king, guys. Christ is king because what it is an embodiment. It's a way of living that is in complete marriage with heaven and earth. It's doing what we were supposed to be here to do. We're stewards of the planet. So this is interesting that, we've got like forms of function of, even the planets. The planets have a persuasion that happens on Earth. And not all the planets do, but some of them do. And these planets, they have a function that has an influence on our planet, just like the Elohim. They also have a influence on us because they're a certain archetype. And then you have to go back and look at, all of these different time cycles that happened throughout in the past since the beginning of this experiment here, where we went from being light beings into physical form, right? And then we started embodying different archetypes depending on what arc we were in, right? Which arc were we in? There's been so many. There's been Lemuria. There's been, the original one where they didn't have form. It was the Polarians. Now, this is where Theo and I came from, this Polarian into the Hyperborean. And then the Hyperborean people, they phase shifted out of the higher realms and they came into the third dimensional realm. See, and this is why we have these cycles, because, when these beings are higher evolved, right? They're higher evolved than we are. They can't inhabit a space that's low dimensional. So the field has to be reset in order for them to be able to come out, basically, if that's what you want to say it, in order for them to exist here. Or we have to phase shift up, right? We have to phase shift up. And see, this is what's happening in the other realms. And, I was hoping that some of the regular viewers that I talk with regularly outside of the channel, that are channel members, that I've met through the channel, who have a similar walk, we're going to be able to chime in on this, because we've all been having we've all been having astral experiences where we're phase shifting. Now, one of the things that I know from being what I call the 13th archetype, or coded with these wolf bloodlines, and from, different time cycles, coming from the original Earth Mother, or the primordial mother of Earth, being a part of her directive here right now, is that we realm walk. We realm walk. And we're threshold guardians. Just like I was talking about when I did the video a couple days after Charlie Kirk lost his life. He was a guardian, a threshold guardian. This is why he looks big like he did. This is why he had the influence that he had on the world stage, was because he has what I call the mojo. It's certain beings that are born. They're born for this timeline, and they're born for a certain purpose, right? And it's kind of been spoon fed to their subconscious throughout their whole life. This is why Candace Owens now is talking about all these programs. And, she's talking about things that Charlie shared with her, that it's just like what I said. He's a threshold guardian. He was a threshold guardian. This is why he was 6'5". 6 + 5 is 11. He's coded. It's coded all throughout him. So if you haven't watched that video, you got to go back and do that. I waited until the 13th to do my analysis of what I felt like happened with Charlie, and how it was all in the architecture. It was totally coded. It was sacrificial. It was coded architecture and everything. And so I knew that they needed to look at whoever set his events up, because that was an inside deal. So, in my opinion, I felt like whoever set the events up coded that in the architecture. So in the Florida Place Name book, this is the book that I've been going through, and man, this is such a good book. I've got to buy it. I've got to buy a copy. Somebody stole the last one from my public library, so they had to ship one over from a closer city. So I started going through this book, and yeah, I'm pretty sure that we've had many epochs in Florida. One of them was the Atlantean Age. That was definitely part of Florida. There's still evidence of it left. And the time of the Christ millennial on Earth, the last Christ millennial. This is when the Earth was embodying Christ consciousness. The Earth was embodying Christ consciousness. And so we had a worldwide time of Christ consciousness. This is when we change the whole template of Earth by going through this Fibonacci spiral right here, and going through all of these and coming out all the way to the end, where we go back to Jupiter. We go back to the Jupiter archetype, which is growth. It's locked in through Saturn. 55 is the next number in the Fibonacci spiral, which is a double magnification of Venus. Then we go to 89, which is Vulcan, and the Vulcan is what makes the gold, right? So we go from the double creative heart space into Vulcan. We get locked in gold. And then 144 is the last number there on the Fibonacci spiral, like 144,000 saints, 144,000 of us to put our blood on our oath to bring heaven to earth and free all humanity from bondage, right? And we signed our name and pricked our finger and put blood on it. And we uploaded it to the quantum field, uploaded it to the internet. Hashtag blood over intent. I've done that many times. I'm telling you, I'm committed. I'm committed to turning this ship around, guys. So I want to go through just the list, and I'm not all the way through the book. I had to stop after a couple hours because I just can't sit still too long. So I'm going to read you the list of names that I just picked out of this book that tie a lot of fingers into that. This was an area where a lot of the saints were living. A lot of the saints were here, and I think that they lived in the star forts. And this is why we had all of these big buildings that they turned into the saint asylums, and all of this is because these people that were embodying the Christ consciousness and they were living in this, they had big places where they had communal living. We had common area land. People didn't just have land and nobody had, and they had a fence around it. People weren't allowed to use that. Everybody was entitled to land, and that's originally what the Jubilees were. Is the Jubilees were every 50 years, slaves got to return back to their original home. Land that was confiscated got returned back to the original family that had it 50 years ago. There was all kind of stuff that happened during the Jubilees when they were real Jubilees. And see, this kept the earth balanced, is because we didn't have this kind of control systems that took shape and was allowed to get rooted and embedded. But it did later. But, it's like I've said, it takes catastrophes to break up a crystalline structure. So we will be experiencing some torrential weather, guys. We just have to be prepared. That's all. No need to panic or anything like this. Mother Earth is basically like giving birth. We are going to phase out of the way that we've been. We've been particle and antiparticle Earth. So these two versions of Earth are going to come back together. They're going to reunify, come back together. So all the different layers of Earth are going to merge, and we'll be able to see into the higher dimensional spaces. But, things have gotten a little awry, but you can't change the outcome. All right, so let's go through the list of names. Anna Marie Island. This is by Siesta Key. Okay, Anna is Jesus's grandmother. Okay, Maria is Jesus's sister. But this is also a job title of Maria. These were Vestal Virgins as well. Okay. All right. Anna Marie Island sits on Siesta Key. That's a planetary stargate that has to do with the primordial mother. Okay. Anna Cape. Anastasia. St. Anne Shrine. Angel City. Antioch. Arcadia. Ariel, after angels. There's a lot of cities in Florida named after archangels. Urantia, I already mentioned that. There's a book called the Urantia books, and it talks about a lot of the stuff that has to do with ascension, about phase shifting and reunification of antiparticle Earth with its particle self, and bringing heaven back to Earth. But they talk about the angel Gabriel, and that's the big archetype, or the form of function that they talk about in the Urantia book. But they also talk about Michael, and they call him Jesus Christ Michael of Abaddon. Okay, but it's really worth, if you got time, you can go on and you can read them online, and it's a ton of books, and it's mind-blowing information. Not for the beginner, I'll tell you that. Not for the beginner. Avalon Beach. We also have Avon Park, Avon by the Sea. We've got Baja del Espiritu Santo, which means Bay of the Holy Spirit. Did you know that Tampa Bay used to be called the Bay of the Holy Spirit? Indeed, it did. This is why everyone says that Tampa Bay is covered by a blessing, a force field that has kept it safe. That and St. Petersburg. St. Peter's. Hello, St. Peter. Bay of St. Joseph. The name of this was changed to Ozona, Ozona, and they said it was because the air was so fresh there. Okay, Balula. Remember, I showed you the little snippet on Balula. So that means married to God. This is now Winter Garden, Florida. Winter Garden used to be called Balula. Okay, Bethel. Bethel means house of God or house of El. Okay, this is in Okaloosa County, Florida. Bee Ridge. Okay, Bee Ridge is in Sarasota. Okay, now get this. If you know anything about the Merovingian family, what is their emblem? It's a bee. Okay, in the old bloodlines that survived, that were from the primordial Earth Mother, they dealt with medicinals. Okay, they were the midwives. They took care of bees. They took care of seeds. They took care of births. They took care of all kind of stuff that had to do with life. They were midwives. Okay, they made medicine. They did all of these things. But one of the big things was that they were nymphs of nurseries. They grew the golden apples. They were beekeepers. Okay, so we have Bee Ridge in Sarasota, which once again is by a Stargate. The Stargate is in Siesta Key, which is in Sarasota. Okay, Bee Ridge was called Bee Ridge in Sarasota because every hollow tree had a beehive in it. I mean, come on, you can't make that stuff up. All right, so Ringling in Sarasota, another one, another old world, either dug out of the ground or repurposed materials, because let's not forget, they took these old world buildings from this last Christ millennial, right, where they had these beautiful structures. They took them all apart. And then because there was a shortage of building materials, they put these in catalogs and listed them. So people would buy whatever kind of brick, marble, whatever kind of stuff they wanted on the inside that was taken from these other houses. So did these people that were embodying the Christ consciousness, that were in a higher vibrational state when they were in the millennial Christ, did they phase out, guys? Did they phase out of our reality? So this is the question. Did they? And so when they phased out, they never really left these houses. They just phased into a higher dimensional space, maybe still occupying the same space. I mean, who knows, right? Is this how ghosts inhabit houses? Because they still inhabit the space without inhabiting physical form, which would mean that they were in a fourth dimensional space of that space. Think about it. I mean, so did the saints, are the saints in a higher dimensional space still in these same spaces? Is this why there's all the symbolism in these cathedrals with the checkerboard floor, how you can have light magic or dark magic in these same spaces, that they go to the Apsu or they go to the heavenly realms, right? You can phase shift either one, whichever it is, your flavor, because there's really no right or wrong. If you decide to go to the dark side, it just takes you longer to get back to the light, because you got to go all the way through the wash. There's no quitsies. There's no outsies. So, you just go right back through the cycle. That's how it works. You get with the program. Eventually. Okay, so in Ringley's house is called Kadzan, which means the house of John. This was John Ringling's place. That's what he named it, which, he also has like the statue that's behind Ringling's, and it looks like a Roman. And I was like, that's interesting that of all things that he would put that there. And it's right on the Stargate, right by the Stargate. Okay, so we got Bay Lake, and then we have Lake Buena Vista. Now, Lake Buena Vista is where Disney is, okay? Well, Bay Lake and Lake Buena Vista, they're called Twin Cities, and they were known as Fairyland. Fairyland, guys. Now, I have some books on legends in Lake Wales in Florida, and there are a lot of legends that have to do with fairies here. And there were fairies. There's a story about fairies that I did a video on like a couple years ago. That's not far from where that meteor is sitting under that tower, less than a mile away. There was an orange grove there, and a family owned it. And this kid would hear singing and different things, and none of the adults ever heard it. But a lot of fruit started going missing. And so they thought they had a rodent problem, and they called the pest control people out to put traps to catch rodents. And they ended up catching a 1 foot tall naked man in this trap. And he was screaming all kind of stuff to them in a foreign language that they couldn't understand. And so they thought that he was from Ringling, or that he was with the circus. So they let him go. Well, then he ended up getting caught in the traps again. And so the second time, they called the police department and asked them to come and get this thing. They didn't know what to do with it. This was in the 50s. His story is from the 1950s. And so apparently they came and picked this trap up with this little naked gnome-like man. They said he was butt naked and he had a beard, and he didn't have no clothes on. And he was speaking like some foreign language. I couldn't understand him. So the police took the trap with the gnome. This is what it says in the book. And then that night, they all woke in the middle of the night to all the screaming, crashing, and banging. And when they looked out the window, their whole house was surrounded by all these little tiny little people, fairy things. And they were throwing rocks and stuff at the house, and they were screaming because they were upset because I guess because their compadre was gone. They took him. So they called the police department in a frantic and said, please bring it back. Please bring it back. They're attacking the house. So they ended up talking to one of their hands there that worked for them. And he was from Ireland. And he said that you're going to have the place marked with a sacred stone because they're Lilliputians, and that they have to know that they can't eat the fruit because it's a sacred grove. So if you mark it with a sacred stone, that they won't do it. So he had family back home in Ireland, and they ordered a stone and they put it in the orange groves, and they never had a problem with them again. It was a blessed stone that came from Ireland. So, there are little fairies that are well known in Florida and different legends. So I'm going to go through the other thing that I found when I was talking about the same area about these Lilliputians, is that this used to be called Israel's Dish. Israel's Dish was Bonnie Lake, what we call Bonnie Lake now. Bonnie Lake, you could never get into Bonnie Lake because it was owned by the Sand and Silica Mine Company, and they had the whole thing fenced in and guarded. Well, this used to be called Israel's Dish. I never knew that. So, is this contact with the divine? Is this why it's called Israel's Dish? Just thought that was really interesting. This is a quarter of a mile or less from Bach Tower, where that meteor is. Okay, so we've got Camp Casadega. We've got Canaan. We had a city in Florida named Canaan. So we're the dog people here. I'll keep going. So we have Castillo de San Marcos, which is Castle of St. Mark's, Christmas, Florida, Dog Island. And the reason that this was called Dog Island, and I have to read this out of the book because I thought this was real interesting. I marked all of these. I just couldn't even believe some of these places. So Dog Island was... Here we go. Dog Island is in Franklin County, Florida. At the entrance to St. George Sound in the Gulf of Mexico off of Carabel, Dog Island appears on the earliest map in 1690 as Isles aux Chiens, Chines. It is speculated vicariously that there were wild dogs on the island when the French explored, or that the island to a shipboard observer resembled a crouched dog. Dog Island, some 2,000 acres, is 7 miles long. Once there was a federal government reservation here, including a lighthouse and quarantine station as a port of entry for the vessels serving Carabel. Then an important port for the worldwide shipment of lumber. Dog Island today serves primarily as an escape for those desiring to exchange the mainland's problems for white sands, dunes, and surf. But when I was reading it, it said that they found these dogs here in the 1500s. So I was like, well, that's interesting. So if this was the 15 and 1600s that all these dogs were here, the question is what are these dogs here for, right? So was this the Island of the Saints? Was Florida a place where we had the saints living during the Christ millennial? I mean, that's really the question. And then we have Dog Town. So then we have this town called Kismet. Kismet. No, so you know what Kismet means, right? So I thought this was pretty interesting that this town was called Kismet. So let me read you what this says about this city. Kismet. The name Fate or Destiny is founded in 1884 by the Kismet Land and Improvement Company near Lake Dorr, a lake called Lake Dorr. Okay, we've already talked about Seagates. And what now is the Ocala National Forest. I mean, really? There was a 50-room hotel for winter visitors. Kismet flourished until the Great Freeze of 1889. Remember, we had the 1902 reset. Destroyed the groves and crops. So it was torn down and hauled to Eustis. Each piece was carefully preserved and the building set up on the corner of Grove Street and Magnolia Avenue, exactly as it stood at Kismet, and was named the Grand View Hotel of Eustis. Now, we know Eustis is an old name from ancient times. So it's really interesting that they would dismantle this place in Kismet, this hotel by Lake Dorr, right? In the Ocala National Forest, right? Something's a little off about this, right? This place. And that they rebuilt it exactly the same way in the town of Eustis. You can't even make this stuff up. Okay? Eridu. There's a city in Florida called Eridu. The name Eridu is associated with Inky and Atlantis, guys. It's the beginning place where water and life began. Then we have Fort San Luis, which is St. Louis. Then we have a town called Gabriela, which is Angel Gabriel. The Garden of Eden, Glen St. Mary, Golden Beach, Golden Glades, a city called Galaxy. Galaxy. That one was a good one. I had to mark that one because I was like, are you kidding me? Galaxy? All right, so listen to what it says about Galaxy, Florida. Galaxy was a town along the Celestial Railroad, which also served Jupiter, which is a city in Florida, Mars, Venus, and Juno during 1889. All of these are cities. We have Venus, which is now called Venice. We had Mars and we had Juno. We still have Juno, Florida. We have Juno Beach. During 1889 through 1895, in what then was Dade County, but now is Palm Beach County. Its proper name was the Jupiter and Lake Worth Railway, and its 7.5 miles of narrow gauge link steamboat landings on the Atlantic Ocean and Lake Worth. Oh, by the way, they are bringing steamboats back to Florida. They found 2 ancient steamboats, old steamboats, that were buried in Lake Kissimmee out here. And so there's all kind of artifacts that I think are going to start coming on display about stuff they found in Florida finally. So in Juneau's newspaper, The Sun disapproved of the heavenly nickname applied by travelers, believing they were poking fun, which would obscure the worth of the area. When cold nipped the area, the editor wryly called the celestial roll of Jupiter, Juno, Venus, Mars, and the Sun, and said even Mercury had fallen there. Isn't that strange? So then we've got the Heart Bridge, which is also called Isaiah David. Then we have Holy Faith Lake, Hope, City of Hope. We have House of the Refuge, or it was called Zion. We had Zion, Florida. Okay. And then I'm going to do a video on this, the Koreshan community, like David Koresh down in Waco. Well, the Koreshan is a spiritual movement, okay? And there was a guy named Dr. Cyrus Reed Teed, Teed, okay? He wrote a book called The Cellular Cosmogony. And I'm telling you, the authorities had a freak accident with him, and then he died right after that. But this Koreshan unity is the movement, and this is David Koresh got this name from the Koreshan, okay? And so the question is what did they really discover in Waco, guys? I mean, if you go back and look at the video where they interviewed Phil Schneider's wife, like years later, she says that what happened was that information was going to be coming out about what happened at Waco the morning of the Oklahoma City explosion, if you want to put 2 and 2 together. And what they didn't want people knowing was that they had dug underground in Waco and they found tunnels. And then these tunnels were attached to other civilizations that they weren't supposed to know about. And so this is what happened, according to Phil Schneider's wife, is that they had to not let this information get out by the people that were living on the compound in Waco, one. And two, the report could never see the light of day that was in Oklahoma City at that building. And so the other thing that Phil Schneider's wife said was that he looked at that explosion in the Oklahoma City building. Sorry, guys. That he said that the building was the explosives put in the elevator. So that's interesting. So I want to explore this whole Coruscant unity, because it all ties into an early spiritual movement that was going through Florida. And that's why we had Cassadaga, because Cassadaga is the headquarters of the spiritualist movement that happened. And this was my grandmother's book. It's hard to see in here. The ABCs of Spiritualism. And if you see down at the bottom, their headquarters is in Cassadaga, Florida. Southern headquarters, Cassadaga. So there was a lot going on here that had to do with spiritualism and, Christ consciousness and a cycle change. So we also have a city called Corona, Korona, which means crown. And that's in Flagler County, which is right by St. Augustine, right? St. August, right? And we have St. Mark, Santa Fe, Little Santa Fe Lake, which means Saint Faith. Mecca, there's even a city called Mecca. That's in Pinellas and in Seminole County. So the question is, are we living on remnants of old timelines that phased out? Did they phase shift out? Did the frequency phase out? And are they still inhabiting the same spots in a higher dimensional space? And so maybe these old world buildings, are actually where the saints were living. The star forts were where the saints were located. Because we've talked about this being sacred geometry that has to do with embodiment of this. Okay, this is embodiment. This is like a fractal, and this is all encoded in star forts. All of this stuff is encoded with this type of geometry. So who's to say that they just didn't phase shift into a higher dimensional space, but they're still here? And that we had the cataclysm, right? We had the mud flood that created the current that broke up the system and allowed the phase shift to happen, where we went from our old particle and antiparticle self being together to being separated. And so it takes a catastrophe or a cataclysm to break it up. Okay, I got to end this live. So I will catch you guys on the next one. Please leave your comments and subscribe and share the videos. Thanks for watching. Sorry, guys. I got to take this call. All right.